It's almost April 1st, and that means April Fool's Day, and the jokers in the House of Commons are raising the carbon tax on Canadians as their way to, as they say, mitigate climate change. I'm not sure how if I give Justin Trudeau more of my money to waste, it will make the weather better, but that's the logic if you follow the Liberals. But Tom's got some ideas for what the Conservative parties and Conservative activists can do something different for once, other than the homogenous narrative that comes out of Ottawa, where the only way to deal with climate change is to pay more money to the government because people are causing catastrophic climate change. And I think when we concede that, we concede the first ditch to the other side, don't we?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because Pierre Poilievre 2 days ago had here in Ottawa an Axe the Tax rally. And, you know, he's been having these all across Canada. We had a couple of our representatives go. They both left early because it was super loud and super crowded. But I watched it on the internet and I, you know, assessed it. But, you know, the trouble here, Sheila, is there's a big disconnect between what the party brass are saying and doing and what the grassroots are doing. You know, we had a booth at the Strong and Free Networking Conference 2 years ago, and we were saying, you know, there's no climate emergency. You know, we were being very candid about the circumstance, and hundreds of grassroots supporters came up to us and said, yeah, we agree with you, but our leaders aren't saying this. And in fact, it's interesting because just down the hall, they had a seminar with panelists and everything about a conservative approach to stopping climate change, or words to that effect, you know. So they had a question period afterwards, and so I sat right in the front row, and I was going to ask them some hard questions. Well, they canceled the question period. I have a feeling they saw me sitting there. But regardless, I went to the chairman of the seminar afterwards, and I said, do you think we have dangerous climate change caused by humans that it's worth restructuring our entire infrastructure to try to stop? And he said, no. I said, well, then why are you holding a session here about a conservative approach to stopping climate change? And he said, oh, we fought that war and we already lost it. I said,
we stopped Kyoto, didn't we?
Yeah. And I said to him, no, you never fought that war. You had a few people like Preston Manning gave a couple of good speeches on it. Bob Mills did. Stephen Harper did. You know, a few people did that, but you immediately quit and they switched sides. In fact, Preston Manning switched sides. Stephen Harper, of course, approved with John Baird the Paris Agreement. Bob Mills, who I worked for, he changed sides totally. You know, so I mean, what happened is the leadership never really fought this issue, and they just simply succumbed. They just kind of rolled over and played dead. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, we lost. And you know, it's a big mistake because I think the ultimate objective of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre in particular, should be to kill the climate scare in Canada. Okay, that should be the real objective, because the carbon tax is only a symptom of the disease. Okay? It's a symptom of the disease. The disease is the idea that we can stop climate change, which is, of course, nonsense. I mean, it's absolute and total nonsense. And so what I find is that they seem to lack an overall strategy for how they're going to kill this thing, because it's not just the carbon tax. I mean, the price, of course, permeates all through the whole supply chain. And, you know, in many, many ways, the climate crisis is crippling farmers. It's crippling our oil and gas industry. It's, you know, even anti-abortion people are finding that the climate scare is now linking up with the abortion industry because, of course, they want to have less people on Earth. And, you know, you go through all there must be dozens of areas that the climate scare is affecting. But none of these groups are saying, sorry,
municipal taxes.
Oh, yeah.
Ottawa, where you have one of the most behemoth climate schemes.
Yeah,
on
that's right.
The continent.
Yeah. And so what they need is a sensible strategy, a long-term goal to kill the climate scare in Canada. And it's not just delaying the carbon tax to 2030, 2050 like Danielle Smith is doing. You know, I really like Danielle Smith, but no, you don't need a carbon or a carbon neutral at all. But, you know, right now in the Conservative plan, okay, they have the old one still on the internet, which was Erin O'Toole's. But even in their September 2023 policy document, they say this. They want the adoption of a pan-Canadian low-carbon aluminum purchasing policy. And they say they want to have a purposeful, gradual transition to a lower carbon use future. What for? I mean, why do they want to have that? It's damaging to their industries, to all the industries that support conservatives. And they go on further to say, including carbon capture technology, which is a disaster. Okay, that's a recipe for no coal. Okay, it's also extremely expensive. It's also dangerous, potentially dangerous if you're too close to it. And I know you are. Battery storage. Okay, so you have to say, well, what the Conservatives leadership are saying is, and I'm sure they're strongly influenced by red Tories in their communications and strategy section, okay? When I worked for the party, when it was the Canadian Alliance, I was a legislative assistant for Bob Mills. What I found was that in the back rooms, while most of the MPs in those days, were definitely conservative, both socially and economically and practically, the red Tories were in the background. And, when the two parties merged, when the Canadian Alliance merged with the Reform Party, what happened is that the red Tories in the background, even though they only had two MPs, okay, in the Progressive Conservative Party, and they had, I don't know, maybe 25 in the Reform Party, or in those days, the Canadian Alliance, but what happened is that the people in the back room essentially hijacked the party. So you ended up with a red Tory party, which now is not really very different to the Progressive Conservative Party of Brian Mulroney and Kim Campbell. Okay, so we're right back to where we started. And what they've been saying, and, you can sort of see this, they're saying, well, we can't say these things because the polls show that most Canadians think that we have a climate crisis. Okay, good. So that's your starting point. Your starting point is, well, in many cases, they're push polls.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They'll ask people stupid questions like, should we save the climate for future generations? Yeah. Like, I can remember my dad was questioned in one of these polls, and he said, how do I answer a stupid question like that? There's no answer.
When did you stop beating your wife?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I've just seen Abacus data polling that says that even for millennials and Gen Z people, so regular old Trudeau voters or future Trudeau voters, they don't even put climate change in their top 5 issues. It's all affordability.
Oh, yeah.
They only care about seeing the fact that the lifestyle of their middle-class parents is completely unattainable for them. And they are ripe to be told that the carbon tax is one of the reasons that you will never afford a house.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because StatsCan last month, this month, they came out with the inflation figures for February. And Canada's doing pretty well. It's 2.8%, okay, which isn't too bad. But the interesting thing there is that Saskatchewan was only 1.7%. And StatsCan itself said the difference, which is more than a third, okay, it's 1.1% difference between Canada as a whole and Saskatchewan, was because they weren't collecting the carbon tax, okay? And so they keep saying, oh, it's only fractions of... No, it's huge. The impact of the carbon tax is huge. And so my whole point, Sheila, is that they need a long-term strategy where they're going to kill the disease, not just the symptom. And so I've laid out a few steps here, okay? Now, at first, they're going to say, oh, my God, we can't attack the climate scare. We'll be called deniers, and all that sort of thing. Well, okay, yeah, you don't do it all at once. You don't do what Danielle Smith did back in 2012 when she was leader of the Wild Rose Party. She was at a leaders' debate, and she expressed a sensible doubt about the climate scare. And, oh, my God, the audience went crazy. They were booing and everything else, and she was ripped up by the media and everything. Now, that doesn't work. Obviously, you can't just go from nothing to being a climate realist. You have to move there gradually, and you have to change the language. This is something that I'm very sad to see that Pierre Poilievre, for example, talks about, carbon emissions and things like that. Now, it's interesting because there's a book called The Art of War. It's an ancient Chinese document, and it talks about, what you shouldn't do. And one of the things you shouldn't do is fight your battles on your enemy's terrain, because they understand it a lot better than you. They know all the escape routes and everything else. But you see, that's what the Conservatives are doing. They're fighting the battle on the climate alarmist terrain because they're using climate alarmist language. And I'll just give you an example. They call it a carbon tax. Well, what is it really? It's not a carbon tax. Carbon is soot or graphite. And when you say carbon tax, people think of things like this, which is a piece of bituminous coal. Okay, they think of something dirty. So what they should be calling it is a tax on energy, okay, or a tax on everything. Or if you want to be exact, you call it a tax on carbon dioxide.